Welcome to Where the Ram Bends. I'm Bryce,
And I'm Summer.
and oh boy, do we have a great one today. We have the self advocacy coordinator of the Developmental Disabilities Council and a dear friend of both of ours, Morgan Davis. And boy, was this episode a fantastic one.
I loved this episode. Morgan is such an amazing human being, and just to hear her own personal story was really amazing.
And to know Morgan as well as we do, for those that don't know, Morgan is a fierce advocate and she's very passionate about disability and being walking her own journey. And you will hear through snippets of this podcast Morgan telling her story in her own words.
Yes, it's such an valuable conversation. And with that, let's get started.
Welcome back to Where the Ramp Ends. I'm Bryce, and today on Where the Ramp Ends, I am so excited because we have a fellow disability advocate and cerebral palsy warrior, my friend Morgan Davis. She is the self advocacy coordinator for the Developmental Disabilities Council, and she also has a degree in, I believe, intersectionality. If I'm saying
Sociology, but yeah.
sociology. So, welcome, Morgan, to Where the Ramp Ends. I am so excited to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. And yeah, I don't have a degree in intersectionality, but a lot of my sociological philosophy is about intersectionality and just meeting various identities and how they influence one another.
That's
So,
amazing. So, for our listeners, our very first question for you is not really a question, but a statement. Can you briefly introduce yourself for our listeners?
so you introduced me pretty well. I am a self-advocacy training director slash coordinator, but more importantly, I'm a self-advocate myself. That's probably my greatest identity. Um, I've had CP since I was like 12 hours old, and
Right.
I'm 31 now, so I've literally lived with it for my entire life.
We love fellow CP warriors with me being one myself. I love to have conversations with you and, just banter back and forth about things that we have been through. And since we're both, partners in policymaking, uh, graduates, we're also Oklahoma LEND graduates with being under the mentorship of fellow self advocate and legendary disability advocate Chuck Roberts. Can you
Yes.
talk about that a little bit on how much um, those two leadership programs, and especially being under the tutelage of Chuck Roberts, really shaped you as an advocate?
Okay, so first of all, I have to like brag on the council a little bit, just as a self-advocate. I started out in the youth leadership forum
Go Brad.
in like 2012. Well, that was before Brad came along, but he's still my bestie. Um, but it was like 2012 when I was 17. My mom signed me up and, like, filled out the paperwork and pretended to be me because she knew that I wouldn't want to do any of that. I was really shy. I was, just really wanting to stay in my room. I'm still an introvert, but, I was even more so back in high school. So she, like, got the interview set up just randomly one day with Jennifer Randall, and, I came home from school one day, and she said, "You have an interview," and I was like, "An interview for what?" And she was like, "Ask questions later, just answer all the questions she has for you."
Right.
So, I was talking to this random lady, about what I like to do and stuff, And after the interview, I was so annoyed. I didn't understand why my mom had done any of that. I was yelling that I wasn't gonna go and that, I hated being in front of people. And she was like, "Well, you're gonna go." She was like, "You don't have to stay, but you're gonna go." And it was in Chickasha, Oklahoma. I'd never been away from my parents. She was like, "You're gonna go." So we went, and I was like, "Fine, I'm only gonna stay a night, forget all of this, I don't care." Um, and by the 7th day of YLF, or the 5th day? I don't know, I was, very popular. I was speaking up for myself, and that's when I really realized that I wanted to be in social justice and what I really wanted to do with my life. So, yeah, that's kind of how everything else propelled. Uh, a few years later, I did Partners in Policymaking, at my own will, and then many, many years later after that, I finally decided to do LEND because I knew that I didn't wanna get a traditional master's degree, because of anxiety and mental health issues, but I knew that I wanted to perfect my craft and disability, so I applied for LEND. So that's kinda how that
Yes,
started.
and that's that's funny you mentioned that because when I was finishing part when I was doing partners, you were doing Lind at the same time, and
Uh-huh.
I had done Lind the year prior, and I remember you coming to me on our Tuesday meetings and saying, "Hey, uh, can you look at this project for me for Chuck?" And I said, "Oh, yeah." Welcome to the weekly meetings of Chuck Roberts. If you know, you know. Let me give you guys a little background. You're only supposed to meet a couple of times during the entire lend process with your mentor. Mr. Chuck Roberts wanted Morgan and I to meet once a week for the entire duration of lend. So I've probably met with Chuck 25 or 30 times throughout the time of lend.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely, I love him so much, but
Yeah.
he definitely expected so much out of us and pushed us, and I'm grateful for it because that program LEND is 9 months, but again, we get 3 hours of, master's level work. So, I consider my LEND certificate like a degree almost, except it's, like, unaccredited. So it's hanging up on my wall with my other degrees.
Yes. It
So,
was
yeah.
300 hours of coursework that we had to do. We had to take additional classes and go to class every Thursday night, sit there for
Whether it was online or whether it was in person. Yeah.
yeah, and, listen to lectures and speakers and, all the things, and, you know Chuck was very, instrumental in pulling out the the best out of his self-advocates, like, when Chuck wants you to pull something out, he will get it out of you one way or another.
Yeah. Yep. And, he's going to, I don't wanna say bug you, but he is definitely going to get in contact with you until
Yes,
you finish what you need to finish. Yeah.
yes.
Yep.
So, what is the biggest lesson that you have learned throughout your journey as a self-advocate that you wish that you would have been able to tell a younger version of yourself?
Um Probably just like 2 things. Intersectionality is a superpower. Learning how your identities intersect and work together, that's a superpower. Um, and just vulnerability is a superpower. Being able to be aware, to be self-aware of yourself and your limits and your strengths and apply that, um, is very important, especially when you're dealing with, people work, like being a training coordinator. So yeah. And I always say that, sociology is my biggest blessing.
I know that Summer will really appreciate this. Summer has a daughter that is 6 years old and has Down syndrome, and she's starting to learn how to advocate for herself. What would you what advice would you give to Summer or Julia, since she is in the beginning stages of her own advocacy journey?
Just remember that advocacy is simple. It doesn't have to be, immediately talking to legislators or being on a podcast. It can be as simple as, telling somebody what you want for dinner, or, telling somebody that you don't feel well and you need to go to a doctor. It's just speaking up for yourself and others. So
I was talking about this the other day with somebody, because I'm getting ready to do a couple parent advocacy trainings. And that's one thing, like I was saying, just calling and making a doctor's appointment for your child is
Right.
advocating for them, just showing up. And that's kind of, I was thinking about this yesterday, and I've kind of used this analogy with Bryce in the past. But yesterday I'm driving to get the kids from school, and there's traffic was backing up, and when I got to the point where I could see what was the problem, there was a big bag of leaves in the road. And everybody's, like, slowing down so they don't run over the leaves and going around them, but you know what nobody was doing? Nobody was stopping and moving the leaves. So
mhm.
I go and I park my car, find a safe place to park, and I get out of my car and I wait for everybody, to stop and let me go grab the leaves and move them out of the way. And that's, to me, that's what advocacy is.
Yes.
You come up on a roadblock and you don't just go around it, just you don't just get yourself around it. You stop and move it for everybody
Yep.
behind.
Yep. Yeah. And Morgan, you'll appreciate this story. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, before the ice storm hit, Summer and I had a conversation. She was going into Walmart to get a few things before the ice storm hit, and she said, it just dawned. I'll let Summer finish the story, but she thought of me in the Walmart parking lot, and I was like, oh, that is so awesome that, you know,
Well, we had just had this conversation. Bryce was, talking about he can't just sporadically drop everything and run to the store for milk. A big snowstorm was getting ready to hit, so I dropped everything and went and got essentials because we're gonna be locked in the house, for who knows how long. And so I run to the store and everybody's, like, last minute getting all the stuff they need. And I just reminded me of what Bryce said, that he can't just randomly that he it takes planning. And so just knowing, having those conversations really helps able-bodied people to understand. And I think just having those conversations really makes a difference. Yeah.
Absolutely, because people don't really understand until somebody they know has been
Yes.
impacted, or until
yep,
they experience it themselves.
yep,
And, everybody is going to have some kind of experience with disability at some point in their lives, and that's what I don't think a lot of people understand,
I
until it actually
I
happens to
want
them.
you to briefly share your um experience through college about how you had to Uber, from college and back home, and even though you were, thankful for the independence, it got expensive, and I want
It it absolutely did. So, when I first started college, I went to Rose State College in Midwest City, Oklahoma, which was about 15 minutes away from my house. So at that point, I did Embark, which was, somewhat free. Signing up for it was free because of my disability, but I still had to pay $7 to and from college every day. but that was kind of a set rate. That was something that I was used to, and I had a ticket that I scanned every day, and things like that. Uh, Once I graduated from Rose State, about 5 years later, because I could not figure out what I wanted to do with my life,
Right.
mm, I went to UCO, and that's all the way in Edmond, Oklahoma, which is like 35 minutes away from where I live. My parents were working at the time, so they could not drop everything that they were doing and drive me to class every day. I was going to class, I think, at one point every day of the week. So again, it was going to and forth, from school to home. And depending on what time I would request an Uber, the price might change because of traffic. So it was definitely just really expensive. And at the time, it was on my parents' dime. Thankfully, I'm grateful to my mom and my dad for how much support they gave me at the time. But looking back, if I had to pay for it myself, that would have been astonishingly expensive, and yeah,
Yeah, and the reason
so
why I bring it up is because a lot of people don't understand the financial uh burden that a lot of people with disabilities have because most people with the disability, for lack of a better word, don't have the able-bodied income that able-bodied individuals get to experience.
mhm. Yeah, and, we talk about that a lot. That's why I think you and I both advocate, and, my job advocates for the, concept that everybody can work. We need accommodations, we need understanding, empathy, not only empathy, but, radical empathy, which is just understanding where people come from in their lives, and some of the variables that they have in their lives that affect what they do and how they do it. But, if that's the case, then everybody can work. So I'm sorry, what else was your question?
Just the fact that not everybody in the able-bodied community understands how difficult it is for the disability community to have financial freedom, and that's one of the
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And even though everybody can work, even with things like SSI and disability and stuff, we just have to be very careful, where they can work and how much money they can make, because again, it's their livelihood. It's how they are able to help themselves and be independent. So again, we just have to be mindful not only of accommodations for jobs, but mainly how disability monies can affect people with
Yes.
disabilities.
And,
Uh-huh.
that's one of the conversations we've had on our own, personal time and in our meetings that, a lot of our brothers and sisters with disability, that's the only income they have, so they have to be really sparingly on what they spend their money on.
Yeah, yeah, and we've talked about sometimes people have to choose between meds and, apartment rent. We talk about that a lot in the trainings we do, and my work as a self-advocacy training coordinator. So yeah, and again, it's because, disability monies are often a fixed income. So, if you have an unexpected purchase or an unexpected event, sometimes you do have to choose, and that's unfair, and yeah.
Morgan, can we talk a little bit more about accommodations? Because I think a lot of people, when they hear accommodations, they see dollar signs. They think, oh, we got to make these big, expensive accommodations or
Oh, this is wonderful.
adaptions. Is there, can you give some examples of what like some simple accommodations might look like?
So, one accommodation that I talk about a lot with the trainers that I work with are glasses. Um, I think about 90% of the population, which is huge, probably wears some form of glasses or some type of contacts or something. It's again, at some point, I think everybody's going to have, some type of experience with glasses. So glasses are a huge accommodation. Um, but it's an accommodation because it helps people to see.
Right.
Another thing could be, voice to text, which is, now on our cell phones, now on our computers, typically programmed into cell phones and computers, because sometimes voice to text is easier than texting
Right.
with your hands. I know for me, um, it's easier for me because I do text so much to send emails and do work from my cell phone. And people are gonna think that's so odd, but I really think it's because I just grew up with cell phones. It's just easier for me to use my cell phone to work than it is to work on my actual laptop because I don't type well. I type with one finger. So it's quicker for me to use my thumb to send stuff than it is for me to use my pointer finger to type a key. So, yeah,
And we talked about this, on a personal level that I can whip out an email voice to text, in 20 seconds versus the same email. If I were to type it by hand, it might take me 15 minutes to write the same email.
exactly, exactly. And again, I think that's kind of a testament to the adaptions that we make as people with disabilities. People with disabilities, they learn how to live. We can't do one thing one way, so we learn how else to do it, you
And,
know?
quick shout out again to Chuck Roberts, which is kind of the modern, adapter of assistive technology. Like he has been making his assistive technology devices longer than we have been alive.
That's fair. Summer, you look like you have a question
Well,
or
no,
a comment?
I was thinking about you were talking about glasses and, before we started recording, we were talking about Survivor. Always listen to the Survivor podcast the morning, the day after the episode comes out, and Jeff Probst was just talking about the accommodations that they've made for people with disabilities on the show, and he was using glasses as an example. He said that's an accommodation that,
It absolutely is.
we let people use glasses, and sometimes they have part of the one of the challenges to swim, so they can't swim with their glasses, and so they make the accommodation. They say, "You can't wear your glasses, but where do you want us to put your glasses so you know where to go to get them?" And he's just talking about simple accommodations. So just you bringing that up, I think it's interesting, that, shows like that do make accommodations and that he acknowledged that. So I just had
And
that
I'm
thought.
also gonna put a plug in here also that if you're looking for a place that has kind of set the bar in Oklahoma for accommodations, check out a company that Morgan and I have done work with in the past for several years. Oklahoma AbleTech and the guys out there in Stillwater are amazing assistive technology individuals. You can actually go and try out some of the assistive technology, or they can bring it to your house and you can try it for free. It doesn't cost a thing.
That's true.
Yeah, somebody I was just had a conversation with a parent that was trying out a bed alarm, um, for their child that actually, like, shakes they can set the alarm and it shakes the bed to wake them up, and they said, "We're just trying it out to see if we like it, and then we'll go buy it if we like it." So,
That's amazing.
yeah, I know parents use it. It's AbleTech is an amazing resource.
I agree.
Is AbleTech, is that an Oklahoma thing or is that nationwide? Do you guys know?
I don't know. I should know, but I don't know.
We should know,
Um,
but I know that, they've kind of really expanded over the last, I wanna say, 10 years, because when our mentor, Chuck Roberts, was on the board many, many moons ago, he said it was a very small company. They didn't do much outreach, and now that it's kind of, exploded and done more research, a lot of people, well, more people should know about AbleTech than they do. I think that's one of the things about resources, and that needs to be more italicized, is we have the resources in place, ladies and gentlemen, but not enough word of mouth. And that's the thing that I learned so much in Partners in Policymaking, and everybody here can kind of attest to that, is we learned that these services have been in place for a long time, but they're not being implemented well enough.
Yeah, that's what I've found, um, in the past year is that there are so many great resources available, but getting the connection from the people that are providing the resources to the people that need the resources, there's a disconnect. And that's part of one reason I wanted to do this podcast among a couple of other, uh, projects that Bryce and I've talked about doing too.
uh that makes sense. It really
You
does
know,
because what you're doing with this podcast is advocacy, and I know you guys know that, but I just wanted to reiterate that.
oh, thank you. You know, one of the things that, I would really like to see as far as resources, is talking about transportation. People with disabilities and cerebral palsy in particular, because that's what you and I suffer from. There's not a lot of spontaneity, with cerebral palsy. Both you and I, Morgan, are very young individuals, and we like to go out and, have fun and do our thing. But with cerebral palsy and a lot of the transportation things, you can't really do that, because Embark and things like that don't go every which way. And unless you have a friend or a family member take you, you get to miss out on a lot of things. And I love my family to death. I do. I would love to be able to be independent and be able to go do those things independently and not have to worry about it, then have to always bug my family members.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. Because again, we have a right to dignity of risk, and we have a right to, privacy and private lives, and sometimes um you don't necessarily want your family to know everywhere you're going, what you're doing. It's very hard sometimes to be like, I need a ride here, so having a mass transportation system, even having Ubers that, maybe at some point Uber can, rent out vehicles for their drivers that are more accessible, for wheelchair users and so on. Uh, I feel like if they did that, not only Uber, but like any rideshare, I feel like if they did that, they would get a lot more people wanting to work with them and wanting to ride with them.
It's not even people with disabilities at that point. It would be like wounded veterans and
Yeah.
elderly and stuff like
Yeah.
that. Like,
Yeah,
it's
veterans, aging adults, yeah, yep,
so they're missing out on a huge market here.
Something that I've kind of picked up on since we started this podcast, we did that podcast with Tyler Bond, and you asked Tyler what is the issue with progression of disability rights, And Tyler said mobility because a lot of people with disabilities aren't able to readily go to the Capitol and
Right.
advocate for themselves. And then we sat down with a legislator who said it's kind of easy to forget about the disability community. And I kind of connected the two because it's easy for legislators to forget the disability community, um, because it's hard for a lot of people in the disability community to go and advocate.
Yeah.
And
And
so,
Tyler had it right. It's mobility, but not only mobility, just accessibility. A lot of things that we talk about in disability spaces is universal design. Just building a design and spaces not only for people with disabilities, but for everybody.
Yes.
yes,
Yeah,
yes. And I will say, like, and here something I noticed, like, we went to the Capitol and it was accessible to get in. And here it's a good example of where the ramp ends, I think. It was easy for Bryce to get in, but when we get to a legislator's office,
it's hard to
it
get
was
in there.
hard to get into the legislator's office for Bryce.
Yes. Yes.
And
I've been there. And honestly, I'm gonna be very transparent. Use my walker 95% of the time when I leave the house. But for things like the Capitol or for places where I don't know how much I'll have to walk, my wheelchair is best. Whenever I'm in the Capitol, I do use my chair. Just because it's so much easier. So, yeah, I've been there in my wheelchair trying to get into a legislator's office and have to squeeze and,
yeah,
sometimes when you have to roll in there, sometimes, your hand scrapes a wall and,
Yes.
you're
yeah,
bleeding just trying to get into the office,
yeah,
so, yeah.
And I've known you for years, Morgan, and I've seen you use your chair once.
Yeah, yeah, and, that's my own personal choice, but yeah. So it's all about what and we talk about this all the time. Mobility devices, whether it is a chair, whether it is a walker, whether it is a cane, whether it is a hearing aid or some type of device like that. Mobility devices and communication devices are part of a person's body
Yes.
and bodily autonomy. So, like, if you see a person in a chair, don't try to touch it without permission. If you see a person with a walker, don't try to touch it. And if you see someone who is visually impaired who uses a white cane, don't try to touch it or get in the way of it. Because again, that's their body, that's their livelihood. So yeah.
that's great advice.
Morgan, I don't know if you want to share this story, but we were talking about this in one of our DDCO meetings. You had mentioned, you said, I don't mind like if Jennifer or Maggie, like when I'm sitting, helps me, you know, get positioned in a chair or something. But if I can do it, let me do it. And if I need help, then I'll ask for help. Can you kind of
That
share?
that is that is absolutely true. Um, I do like to be independent just because honestly, me being independent allows me personally to have more exercise, which just kind of means, I'm a lot more active. That being said, though, there are a lot of things that I do need help with. So yeah, but just asking and understanding, observing maybe when I could possibly need help and then asking me,
Yes.
is a great thing to do.
And I think that's one of the things that we get along so well about is like we love to be independent and we hate to ask for help because we don't want to feel like we're bothering somebody. And, that's the one thing that I had to learn from Jen over the years is she said, if you need something help with, just let me know. And Jen has been an amazing friend, even before Partners in Policy Making. I met her in Toastmasters International, and she just is an amazing person, an amazing friend, just an amazing disability advocate, coordinator, all the things. And she's just an amazing person to have in your corner.
I agree.
What do you think is the biggest thing that you want to see changed as far as the rhetoric of the disability community? What's the biggest thing that frustrates you about the disability community that we're still fighting?
Honestly, and this is going to be a hot topic. Um, Disability is considered DEI, and it shouldn't be something so nothing that's DEI should be considered controversial because, like, all of it is life, right? Um, but again, disability is something that everyone is gonna face, um, and, it's something that shouldn't be taboo, and when I say it shouldn't be DEI, I just mean that it shouldn't have a bad rap. Like, DEI, inclusion, diversity, equity, all of that stuff is how I make a living, and I love it, and I hate that it's getting such a bad rap just due to lived experience.
Yes.
Um, and disability is part of that lived experience. Being a Black woman, for me, is part of that lived experience, and how the 3 things intersect is part of my experience. So again, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion should not be so controversial that we cannot say it, we cannot use it.
Right.
Because again, I use the word so much, but those things all fall into intersectionality, and intersectionality, vulnerability, social sciences, all of those things are considered by me to be superpowers. So I hope that answered your question.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. It's so controversial. And like you said, like you even can't you almost can't even have a conversation with somebody about it. And I hate that because it is like you said, it's just life. We all, and kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, everybody needs accommodations
Right.
um and everybody deserves respect and inclusion.
And another thing that I think needs to change about the disability, rhetoric is, disability needs to be taught in schools, and not
Yes.
only on a college level, not only on, like, a postgraduate or LEND or partners in policymaking type level, it needs to be taught in K through 12. Not only that, it needs to be brought back to things like the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, because I know that Bryce and I have talked about it. I've talked about it with many of the other advocates that I work with. The civil rights movement and the disability rights movement are very, interconnected.
Yes.
They have helped one another. Many Black Panthers of the civil rights movement helped out with the disability rights movement and vice versa. So yeah, if we can teach disability the same way that we teach regular history, and even along with things like Black history, I think that people would have a more well-rounded understanding about how disability is so, important, and how it is impacting everything we do.
I agree 100%. I've gone as far as talking to a couple of legislators about this, and I'm told um, it's just one more thing to put on a teacher's plate. And I just don't and I get that, the legislators that I've talked to are all for it. They just don't know how to approach it. But, I've got a couple of, social media accounts that get some views here and there, and I did a video on the Capitol crawl, and the number of comments that video hit over 1,000,000 views. The number of comments of people saying, "Why didn't I learn about this in school?"
Right.
Exactly.
The Capitol
Exactly.
crawl. Uh, I can't
I didn't learn about, like, Ed Roberts or any of the disability advocates until I got into Partners, until I got into YLF, and that is just baffling to me.
Yeah,
Yes.
I just can't imagine that that's not I understand why I wasn't taught about the Capitol crawl because it was happening as I was in school, but, or right after. So I just don't I can't imagine that it's not even mentioned in our history books.
And to be honest, like, what's even more wild and y is I'm on Morgan and I are on the, with self-advocacy solutions, and we have a coworker who has been a state and national disability advocate for longer than both of us have been
International,
internet.
international, that this person has even gone out of the country. Yeah.
Yes. She is one of I call her the godmother of Oklahoma disability advocacy because she really has she's one of the main reasons why the R word is no longer in, documents, and we're talking about shout out to Miss Nancy Ward, who worked for the Disability Law Center as a voting coordinator for over 30 years. She has more knowledge about disability rights and history than any person I know. She's had personal conversations with Ed Roberts and Judy Human. She knew these people. Like
Yeah,
actually
like, she knew Ed Roberts on, like, a personal level, like, they were friends. So, that's wild to me.
And I think, Bryce, you've mentioned trying to get her on the podcast,
yes.
right?
I need to get Nancy we need to get Nancy Ward on here just to you know, she's been able to talk to I think she's even talked to presidents about disability advocacy long, long, long time ago.
That would be amazing.
I
She's
wouldn't be surprised if she had.
So, just to know that I work with so many one that we work with so many wonderful people that have, you know, paved the way for my own journey because like Morgan said, in the beginning of the podcast, when I was growing up, I wanted nothing to do with disability. I wanted to get a degree in finance. Actually, back up a little bit before that, I wanted to go to Hollywood and be an actor. I wanted nothing to do with disability, and it wasn't till my time in LEND that I really realized that knowledge is power, and being comfortable in my own skin with living with cerebral palsy and living with a disability, it's really not that bad because
And I don't remember the quote exactly, so I'm not gonna say it, but I think that going off of Black History Month, because Black History Month was just last month, I think Martin Luther King said something very similar about education being one of our greatest assets and greatest powers. So, yeah.
and I'm so thankful for, people like Jen and people like Brad and, creating relationships with you, Morgan, and, because prior to LEND and prior to Partners in Policymaking, I didn't have relationships with people with disabilities. I had relationships with regular able-bodied people, and to be honest, and I'm not trying to offend anybody, but honestly, some of my greatest friendships now are with guys like Tyler and with you and with Brad because I can have a conversation about a disability related issue and you guys get it.
Mhm.
And I don't feel like I have to be as vulnerable. I can just talk as a person and be like, "Oh yeah, the accommodations at this place really suck."
Mhm.
So I'm
No,
grateful.
I completely understand.
Morgan, we just I think I mentioned that we just dropped an episode with Jill Jacobs, and some of her advice to me was to um, have Julia have mentors with adults that have disabilities because she has heard many adults that have disabilities say that when they were little, they didn't know that people with disabilities or kids with disabilities actually grew up,
Mhm.
or that they thought that they grew out of their disability just simply because they didn't see adults with disabilities. And so, what are your thoughts on that advice?
I think, again, I'm gonna say another quote unquote DEI type statement. Representation matters. Representation matters. And people don't quite understand what that means. That doesn't mean that like everybody has to completely be the person that they look up to. Just kind of pay attention to what they're doing and just understand that you are not alone. Even if even if you have views that are completely different from a person, just seeing somebody that is somewhat similar to you in power, or in a position that you wanna be in is very, very empowering. So,
Yeah.
absolutely, I would encourage her to have adult mentors or teenage mentors. I didn't have a disabled mentor when I was in my teens and
Same.
young childhood, and I am a kind of mentor slash friend to a few people now, and not to brag on myself, but I'm like, I wish I would have had a me
No
back
kidding.
then. So, yeah.
And I think some are adding Morgan to the list of Julia's future people that she can tag in when she, has a problem. I think adding Morgan to the list would be a um, great addition.
I'm adding her to the list as we speak.
Sure, and like I said, you can contact me. I'll give you my number after the podcast. My messages are always open. I text more than I talk, just because I'm an introvert. But hit me up.
Yeah, absolutely. I would like to see, and this is something that I didn't notice until I was looking for mentors for Julia, more representation in TV shows
Yes.
and movies, and just because there is not a whole lot of
No.
representation, and it's
It's
always kind
it's
of like,
getting better, but it's not where it needs to be.
yeah, it feels
Yeah.
like there's a lot of, like, supporting roles,
Mhm.
Yes.
like, well, there's, somebody playing the pitied girl that has Down syndrome. She's not they're not leading roles or
No.
out there, like, real representation. Anytime you see a show that has somebody with a disability in it, I try to, like, "Hey, let's go watch this show."
They haven't been correctly represented, I don't think. There hasn't been a main character with a disability that I feel like is portrayed in a positive way, like, "Oh, this guy this guy or girl is a normal person, just have to, that's just living with a disability."
I don't Going on your point, because it just made me think, Bryce, I don't think there's been accurate representation of the social model of
No,
disability,
no.
meaning the person with a disability doesn't have to be cured. They don't have to be pitied. It's just a social part of life, which has been my entire point of everything that I've tried to say this whole entire
And I'm gonna briefly talk about this.
intersectionality is just a part of life. Disability is just a part of life.
I'm gonna briefly touch on this because we talk about social, you know, we've talked about this in our own personal life, and I'm not gonna dig too deep into it, but one of the things that people don't understand about disability is we want to date and have relationships as well, and I think that's one of the things that people don't understand, that we have wants and desires and the want to go on to dates and stuff like that, and having to navigate that be and having to explain to people one of the main reasons, I get frustrated about dating is I get asked, "I'm sorry to hear that about my diagnosis," I used to get so frustrated because I'm like, "Don't feel sorry for me. Feel feel encouraged that I have the willingness to even come out because I know a lot of my people in my community don't even try because they're so nervous about it."
Yeah. I mean, just like anybody else, we want personal lives. There are so many different views of humans and what
Yes.
they like and what they don't like. So nobody is the same. But, we're the same way. Some people, whether they're able-bodied or disabled, some people wanna date, some people don't wanna date. So there shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all misconception about people with disabilities.
Yes. And I don't think it's fair when they say, "Well, he or she is disabled. They don't need to go out on a date." Why not? Or if
I
they
agree.
wanna have a or if they wanna have a sip of alcohol, why not? Why are you judging them if they wanna have a sip of alcohol?
I agree.
And I think it just goes back to, lack of education and lack of
Yes.
exposure,
Yep.
and until, we just have to keep improving inclusion, and that's something that, as a parent, I see that, parents have to take some responsibility in pushing their kid social into social scenes where, instead of trying to shelter them, instead of saying, "Well, I'm not." Yeah, I'll use Julia as an example. And I need to get Julia into dance or to extracurricular activities that aren't specific for disability groups
Absolutely.
that include typical children. And I need to do that and not be like, well, I'm going to protect her, like I'm scared of what the typical kids are going to do or the parents are going to think, or is she going to do something and are we going to be judged? I think some parents kind of shy away from doing that, and that's something that parents are gonna have to take the reins a little bit. That's part of what our responsibility is in improving inclusion is getting our kids out there and give them the chance, go back to dignity of failure, give them the chance to, um,
Dignity of risk.
dignity of risk.
Dignity of risk. Uh-huh.
Yes, give them the chance to go out there
You know,
and
you, shared a story with me, yesterday about you taking Julia to the bowling alley, and you said you were freaking out about it, and then it turned out to be okay. Briefly share that story because it needs to be.
Well, wha I just took Sam and Julia to the bowling alley by myself, which in the past it was a little bit of a chore and it was stressful because my husband and I would take the kids bowling, and Julia's just kinda like take off, run away, and so, I'd spend a lot of my time chasing her, um, which some of that has to do with her disability, and some of it's just her being a kid. Just, kids just wanna run off and explore.
Being 6 years
She's
old, yeah.
she's 6 years old. So, I it's been a while since we've gone. I thought, "We're gonna go." The kids had been asking to go, so we went to the bowling alley. She did great. She did amazing. I got the kids set up to bowl. I wasn't gonna bowl, so they just the 2 of them bowled, but, um, she went. I got her the ramp for her to roll the
Yep.
ball down,
Mhm.
um, and she put her own shoes on. She We went out and picked out a couple of balls. She carried one to our spot.
Good for
Whenever
her.
it was her turn, she went and picked the ball up, went and sat it on the ramp. We showed her how to do it one time. She did it by herself. And then whenever it was Sam's turn, she went and sat down and waited her turn. She kinda stomped her foot a couple times because she didn't wanna it was when it was Sam's turn, I said, "It's Sam's turn now," and she kinda stomped her foot and said, "No, my turn." And I kinda got onto her and said, "No, we don't act like that. You go sit down and wait your turn." But she did great. Just getting her out there, sometimes it feels like it's
That's just being a kid. Like, that's
exactly,
not yeah.
exactly. And yeah, exactly. She gets the chance to stomp her foot and, just be a kid sometimes. That's
Yeah,
just part of childhood. And
and a
so,
little bit of correction here and there, but that's okay.
that's what being a kid is about, and that's what, messing up is about, is learning. If you don't mess
Yes,
up, you don't learn.
right.
Exactly.
So it's all
And we had an episode with, Michelle Tershner and her son Raymond. Like, when I first heard this story of Summer telling me about it, I was dumbfounded, but when we had Michelle on and she explained it, I got it, you know, because you have such a, you know, fascination of somebody with Down syndrome living on their own independently. I'm like, I want to hear more. And the fact that they have given Raymond the dignity of risk to be able to live on his own independently with boundaries in place and being able to live his best life is a testament of really, really fierce advocacy.
This is a really simple, form of dignity of risk, but, like, my mom isn't completely against them, but my dad was. My dad was not big on tattoos at all. And I wanted one technically illegally when I was 17 because in Oklahoma, you can't
Right.
get a
Right.
tattoo without parental, permission. So I asked him if I could go to Arkansas at, like, 17. And, of course, he was like, "Yeah, you can if your mom goes with you, but I don't know if I'll let you get a tattoo." And so I had to write a report about the impacts of tattoos and how they could negatively affect me, and, the risk and the side effects. He didn't think I would do it, but I was dead serious.
Determined.
Um and I did it, and he was just so shocked that and I think I wrote, like, 3 pages, and he was just so shocked that I did it, he had nothing else to say. And again, my dad was a very religious man, so he was not for tattoos, but even he couldn't say anything, and, now 15 years later, here I am with, 3 tattoos. I've had my nose pierced before, and I have my ears pierced. So yeah, kind of and again, I know that he would be against those things except for the ears, but the fact that he let me do what I wanted to do, um, I was just very proud of that moment.
Actually, that's funny you mentioned that because we have a fellow council member that that Morgan and I are really good friends with that I didn't know that he was fully tatted up until Morgan said something to me, and I was like, "Wait, what?" And you were like, "Oh, yeah, he's tattooed everywhere."
Yeah, and, like, I mean, hands. I think he might have one on his neck. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I have a
and go ahead.
yeah, I have a friend that has, several boys that she's adopted. They all have Down syndrome, and she shows videos. They're young adults now, but, she shows videos of them getting a tattoo, and she gets some pretty hateful comments, like, "Why are you letting them do that?" Instead of looking at them as they're adults. They're
Right,
adults. Instead of people seeing, "Oh, there's an adult that's getting a tattoo," in their mind, she's somehow neglectful
right, right,
or, you know, instead of she's supporting their
huh?
adult decision to go get a
Yes.
tattoo. So, we'll be having
And that's
her.
interesting to me because my parents only paid for 1 tattoo, my first tattoo when I was 17 in Arkansas, but the other 2 that I've had, I've paid for with my own money. So I'd be interested to all of those naysayers that were so against it. Would they say that I was misusing my funds because
Probably.
I'm a person with a disability who has tattoos?
I'm
Was I
Well,
sure they're
being was I
I'm sure
being neglectful to myself? You know, just stuff like that.
yeah, yeah, and that's part of what we're fighting is misconceptions like that. Um,
yes.
so we're gonna wrap it up. I'm gonna let Bryce ask you his last question and then give you a chance to share any final thoughts that you have. But Bryce, you wanna ask?
This is my favorite part of the episode usually because everybody's answer has really inspired me. So I'm going to ask you since you're a dear friend and I love you very much. Morgan, what do you want your legacy to be?
That's a very deep question. I think I just want to be known for helpfulness and radical empathy, and I hope that my advocacy, I hope that my life has helped somebody or influenced somebody.
Well, I can already say, even as a friend and a coworker and a colleague, even us working together for as many years that we have, you've inspired me to continue to strive for things, even though we're fighting together, like you and I working together alongside Jen and Brad and all of us. You know, you inspire me to continue to fight because there's people next to me wanting to fight with me. And
I appreciate that so much. Thank you.
so, with that, any final thoughts that you would like to share with our listeners?
I'm just so, thankful that I've gotten this opportunity. I think this is my very first podcast, so this is
Oh,
dope, and the fact that it'll be, like, on Instagram and other social media, is wild, and, you can tag my Instagram, and I'll put it up there.
absolutely.
The more followers, the better.
Go follow Morgan, guys.
My Instagram is pretty much, um, it's really positive in many different types of ways, so, don't be shocked if you see something that you weren't expecting, but
Right.
I hope that you'll, follow.
Yeah,
Well, we
we'll link your socials in this description, and then whenever we share it on social media, we'll also put all your socials and links to that too. So,
and when we go to the Capitol on Developmental Disabilities Day at the Capitol, we will definitely be shooting some content with you if you would like to.
Yeah, of course. Sure.
Abs- Absolutely. Well, we're about out of time, and for where the ramp ends, I'm Bryce.
I'm Summer.
And this is
And
where
I'm
the ramp
Morgan.
ends. And this is where the ramp ends and where your journey begins. Till next time. Bye bye.